Sure. Yeah.
Great.
So my name is Evan Isaac. I'm a senior application security consultant at a large cybersecurity firm. And what I do on a day to day basis is hack web applications and APIs. So I have a few certifications under my belt. The EWPTX is one of them, as well as the OSCP, but I call it the alphabet soup because I have so many certifications that I don't even know where to start. Also, when it comes to security wise, I am also the founder and lead technical writer of Emory Security, which is a free educational platform on YouTube as well as LinkedIn. So let's hop right into this. So, we're going to talk a little bit about unauthenticated endpoints within this presentation. And the first thing is, well, what exactly is an unauthenticated endpoint? An unauthenticated endpoint is an exposed endpoint that is publicly accessible. And these are the first things that an attacker sees when it comes to a web application. Now, I'm going to speak more on behalf of the web application side, and we're going to walk through a few things together. This is supposed to be an interactive session. So I want to see people commenting in the chat. We're going to have a great time throughout this next 30 minutes. So here are some endpoints that we like to think about when we say unauthenticated. We have the login portal, we have the sign up register page, we have the forgot password, as well as the contact form. And if you just think of these few endpoints, if you could put it in the chat, what are some vulnerabilities that you can think of right off the bat? And we're going to go through a few vulnerabilities as well as attack chains that you can do to start expanding your bug bounty hunting, your false application hunting, whether it be CV hunting or just a penetration test. So I'll give everyone a quick minute to go in and see if there are any comments. So we see SQLI. Yeah, that's a big one, especially on login forms as well as registration forms. Yes. Excessive data exposure is also another one that someone commented. And we'll go a little bit more in depth into that in just a little bit. Cross-site scripting, BOLA. Yeah. So a lot of these can be chained together. And we're going to talk a little bit more about unauthenticated endpoints and how to slowly chain all these different things together. I see user enumeration and brute forcing, SQLI, account takeover, using the forgot password functionality, logic flaws. Yeah, awesome. So let's jump right into our first scenario. Just looking at this slide, ladies and gentlemen, what is the first thing that you notice? What's the vulnerability? Does anyone know? Not so much XML injection. Verbose error. Yeah, Jesse got it. So verbose error. What exactly does this mean? So we're on a login form. It's a post request. We have a username of Mishka, a password of Mimi dollar sign, and we're getting a response of 400 bad requests with an error message user not found. So the first thing that should come to mind is this is exposing a lot of information, right? In the error message, we see that no user was found, which means if we do identify a user, then we have user enumeration and we can begin our attack chain. Now, in this example specifically, we do have the username field. Some cases within applications, you'll see an email field. And when that happens, it can lead to additional attacks like phishing or identifying where the user works, their phone number, anything like that. With the username, it's a little more obfuscated. Obviously, if you look up, let's say, my username, tennis play a sec, I'm sure you could probably find me on YouTube and on LinkedIn and anywhere else that you can really think of, maybe Discord. I don't know. So if we go over to the next slide, we could see that now we get a different response using the user Ali. So username is Ali. The password is the little lion. Again, these are referencing my cats, by the way. This was quickly off the dome kind of thing. So these are referencing both my cats. I have an orange cat named Ali. So the little lion is what we like to call her. And we have an error message of invalid password. So with this information now, we do have a valid user. But what else can we do with this? Let's move on to a little bit more about the severity of user enumeration. Now, most of the time, it's going to be a low severity, right? People are going to say, yes, it's unauthenticated, but who's going to actually guess a user? Well, just a handful of weeks ago, I ended up identifying something similar, nothing too crazy, but I ended up changing the severity from a low to a medium. So this definitely happens where if you can chain specific vulnerabilities together and you can identify a chain scenario, you can up the severity. But again, keep caution. Some clients don't like that, some clients do. It really depends on the clientele, and you're going to have to think about what the client wants, what the client needs. And if you can back up your argument, you'll have a better chance of keeping that severity. So what's the impact? The impact is that user enumeration can lead to user information getting leaked, right? The email address, the username. If there's no rate limiting, it could turn into a password attack, right? A credential stuffing attack. So chaining these attacks together can really cause some serious headache for the developer. Remediation steps is to ensure rate limiting is possible. Now, Jesse, myself, and a few people in the Discord, we were actually talking about rate limiting. It's a very difficult subject because rate limiting, you don't want to do it based on IPs. That can easily be bypassed. But at the same token, how else are you going to do it? So, if anyone has any clues or ideas of how to properly implement rate limiting, please let me know because I've been trying to figure this out for a very long time and it's still challenging to this day. Also, just use generic error messaging, right? So user enumeration comes with error messages, but if you say user and or password not valid, we have no idea if the user is valid or not. We have no clue. We can't decipher whether or not the username or the password is incorrect based on these error messages. Let's look at another example quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the vulnerability on this slide? Anyone know? Look at both the request and the response. Yeah, someone said role. Yep. Mass assignment. Yep. So this is a mass assignment vulnerability. Now, does anyone know the 2023 OWASP top 10 for this? Because mass assignment is no longer a thing in the 2023 version. There's a specific name. Yep, BOPLA. Yep, BOPLA is the correct answer. So the post request is for API register. And again, we have the username and we have the password. But this time, let's say we're creating a new user on this application. We register and the role is set to standard. Well, that gives a lot of information right off the bat, right? Because now we know that it's safe to say that the application is probably going to use standard. They may use admin, administrator, something along those lines. Owner, maybe one of them as well. So we can kind of figure out what the roles may be. And this happens more often than you think. I've seen a lot of applications, a lot of APIs have this specific issue. So when you have the role within the response, it gives you information about the role. But what else can you do with that? If you go to the request, we also get the role as admin. And the reason how we get to do that is because of the request itself. If you add and append the role onto the request as admin and then you ship it off to the response, there's a small probability that it's going to work. Doesn't work all the time, depending on how the backend operates. If it's editable by the user, it can lead to something like this. But let's look at something a little bit similar but also different. What's the issue here? Anyone know? It's Bopla, but can you give a reason as to why this is a problem? Gotta think outside the box. What can you do with something like this? So when we have a forgot password API and you have a username set or you have an email set, it's going to return a few values, which makes sense. It's going to either return, let's say, the username, maybe even the password hash. I've seen that a few times, which is kind of interesting. The role, but it shouldn't send over the code. It shouldn't send the code within the response, right? Because if you have the code and you know the username, well, now you can take that code and throw it into the reset password function on the application. And from there, you can then change the user's password and successfully change their password, leading to an unauthenticated account takeover. This is a very critical vulnerability. And again, you would be surprised how many times I've seen APIs and web applications have this kind of vulnerability. Unauthenticated account takeovers are extremely scary, as many of us know. So make sure to put this in your arsenal. If you do come across a forgot password functionality, send it over to Burp Suite, take a look at the response, see if there's any UUIDs, any codes, anything like that. Throw it into the reset password endpoint and see if you can reset that user's password. Because if you can, that's an unauthenticated account takeover. And they probably want to fix that, right? Because that's a problem at the end of the day. So BOPLA is a medium or high severity. Again, everything is subjective, right? Nothing is ever set in stone. So when I say medium and high, sometimes it could be a low. But in our examples that we just demonstrated, most of the time I would set it as a high, maybe even a critical, just because of the unauthenticated endpoints. So the impact is that you can escalate your privilege on the application and receive different roles and groups depending on how the application operates, but also you can modify unauthorized fields. And what I mean by that is if you have an application and let's say you sign up, you have an email address, let's just say evan.isaac at emorysecurity.com, that web application doesn't let you change your email address, right? It's all grayed out on the web application. However, when you go into Burp Suite, you take a look and you see that there's an email within the request. You modify that email address and it ends up changing that user's email. Now, they're not supposed to do that because the front end told us you're not supposed to do that, right? It was grayed out. But because we were able to do that on the back end, that means there's only validation coming from the front end. And when this happens, there's a chance that they're not doing proper validation of the email addresses either. So if you did identify an email address on the application itself, you can take that, paste it into your request, send it off to the server. And if you receive that the email was changed to that new user's email address, there's a high probability that you just took over someone else's account. So very interesting, right? So just make sure that when you go on to these registration forms and stuff like that, and you can identify another user's, obviously ethically, if you can identify another user's email address, try to paste it in and see if they do proper validation. There's always a chance that they're not. The remediation steps is to manually map out inputs to the model fields. And what I mean by that is whenever you're doing backend code, you're going to have a model and you're going to map the inputs that you have within each request to the database so that it would get stored correctly. And some just paste it in completely and they don't do validation. So by manually putting it in and manually checking each one individually, you can prevent this kind of attack. And also validating and sanitizing user input is a must. Let's talk a little bit about your inbox. Inboxes are very interesting because of this attack. If you have an application that has emails associated to it, so let's say email notifications, a forgot password, you can send numerous of requests using the intruder through that endpoint and flood someone's inbox because there's no rate limiting attached. So the impact of this is that you consume email server resources, which is not good because it can lead to additional business costs and overhead that the business probably doesn't want to deal with. And additionally, the business domain reputation goes out the window. So if you continuously spam, there's a high probability that Google and Microsoft and all these other companies are going to start blocking and spamming your domain because you're no longer reputable, right? You're spamming other people with forgot password links, and they're not really going to care too much about you anymore. So it's very important that they have proper rate limiting in place to ensure that they don't get a ton of emails. I believe Mailgun is $15 a month, and you get 10,000 emails. Anything past that 10,000 mark, you need to pay an extra $1.80. So if we send 20,000 emails, we end up making them pay a little bit more money than they're supposed to within that month. And then if they have actual users that create emails and stuff like that, they're going to get charged even more. So, something very interesting that a lot of people look over. So let's check that source. Let's talk a little bit about rich text editors. I know that a lot of companies do use rich text editors, but they're not always the best when it comes to beautifying text within applications because they lead to a lot of vulnerabilities, especially third parties like Tiny MCE or CK Editor, for instance. Most of them are vulnerable to cross site scripting. And the reason why is because developers believe that they are doing proper checks. Unfortunately, that's not true, right? Most of the time, these CK editors or these tiny MCEs, rich text editors, they're just doing front end validation. So if you take the Burp Suite request, you modify the tags a little bit, you can end up retrieving an XSS, which can lead to a bunch of different things. Think of it like a form. If you're on a form and they have a rich text editor in place, you can essentially take that rich text editor, open up Burp Suite, modify whatever payload you want to put in, send it, and I guarantee it's going to work. I believe 80% or more, maybe. Whenever I see a rich text editor, about 80% of the time, I end up getting stored cross-site scripting because they fail to validate on the back end. So to exploit it, simply go into Burp Suite, set up a unique payload. This is one of the payloads that I love to use, but you can use other ones like the image one or the script one. But yeah, so just try it out and see what you can find, and let me know if you get it to work because they are pretty easy to identify. But let's say we don't have an XSS, right? So let's say in the rich text editor, there's no XSS in place. Well, what do we do? This is called an HTML injection. And essentially, what you can do is, even though most people say it's a low severity, you can do a lot more with HTML injections. If you're on a forum and you can't get XSS to work, let's say that alert box just isn't working, you could try a meta tag. What this meta tag is currently doing is it's going to redirect the user automatically to emorysecurity.com. So if the threat actor pastes in a malicious link, they'll automatically get redirected to their malicious website. And if they clone the login page for that specific website, it can then lead to an account takeover if the user falls for the fish or whatever you want to call it. So something very interesting that people should start looking out for. And the impact is A, you can redirect the user automatically, but B, you can also deface the website, right? You can cause havoc on the website, you can make it your own, you can do a bunch of different things. So this is also a vulnerability that a lot of people say, yeah, it's just a low, but you could do a lot more with an HTML injection. And the remediation steps is to never trust user input. You always have to sanitize and validate on the front end and the back end. I've seen so many times where developers do a fantastic job on the front end, right? They change your payload, they remove your payload completely, but then if you throw it into Burp, it still works. So always make sure to validate the front and the back end. So let's find some authorization issues. If you are on an application assessment, right, and you're just going through some unauthenticated endpoints and you're getting stuck, you can log in and use something called Authorize. Authorize is a fantastic tool for modifying original request with different role-based sessions. So if you have two roles, let's say the admin role and the user role, you would take the user role and you would paste it into Authorize, and you would use the admin role and just start crawling the application. And what Authorize is going to do is it's going to take that original request, paste in the cookie of the user, of the standard user, and it's going to send it again to the server and it's going to check the response. So if the response is exactly the same and the length is exactly the same, it's going to say bypass. If it's similar but not exactly aligned, so let's say it's 80,000, I don't know. Let's say that the length is 80,000 on both, it's going to say bypass. Let's say one is 80,000, the other one is 79,000. It's going to say inconclusive. We're not really sure if it's enforced or not. But if it's enforced, it's going to say something completely different, like 80,000 to 500, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So it compares the length, and here's an example of what Authorize looks like. So we could see that we have the URL on the left side. The next three columns are going to be your length of the request. And then after that, you're going to see whether or not the authorization was bypassed, enforced, or is inconclusive. But let's take a look at some chained attacks together. So we have user enumeration first, and we identify that within the reset password functionality, there's a very weak password reset policy in place, 6 characters and one number. There's also no rate limiting on this login page, and you can brute force the account. What does this lead to? Well, this probably leads to account takeover if there's no rate limiting in place, right? So you always want to make sure that rate limiting is in place, that you have proper password reset requirements, which, by the way, if you do showcase your password reset requirements, you basically give a larger scope for the attackers. So I always say to put generic error messaging even on reset password functionality because you don't want them to know easily at least what your password requirements are. Now, it may be a little bit annoying for the end user to figure it out, But for an attacker, it's going to be a lot more challenging. They're going to need to take a little more time, and they may just disregard your application completely and try to go for a different target. Looking at another example, we have a password reset misconfiguration. Now, this is going to date back to a few things. Number one is email flooding, right? Because we don't have any rate limiting in place. Number two is code generation. If we have, let's say, a bunch of codes being spammed into the user's inbox and they don't expire, this can lead to a password reset attack. Now, brute forcing password reset tokens is not really ideal, right? Most of the time, you're using UUIDs, you're using MD5 hashes, you're using something that's very unique to your application. But with enough time and sufficient time, the threat actor may be able to get a hit and reset someone's password. Very crucial to always have password reset codes to be expired within about 10 minutes or so, 10 to 15 minutes of email. After that, I tell the clients just to wait a little bit longer, maybe 30 minutes, and then have them do another password reset code. Just that way that A, they're not getting spammed with email flooding, but B, you're also limiting the amount of times a user can request a code. And with that, please connect with me on LinkedIn and YouTube. I do have a YouTube channel for Emory Security. We do post a lot of API security stuff because we are partnered with AppSec U as well as AppSec in general. There will be information about the CTF on the YouTube channel. So please be sure to check it out. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Thanks so much, Evan. That was awesome, dude.
Thank you.
There were a few questions in chat. Let me scroll
Okay.
up here. Edwin had asked, how do you keep track of all of this data while you're doing your own testing? Are you using like a spreadsheet? What does that look like for you?
I use the good old noggin. I don't really write notes when I do pen tests, which is honestly a huge problem. But what I use at least for CTFs and for gamified hacking is Obsidian. So I create templates and I'll be writing a blog on Emory Security in the near future about note taking because I also struggle in note taking. But what I would do is I would first set up your methodology, right? So have an Excel sheet or have Obsidian open up, write down everything that you can think of in regards to attack vectors for that in particular for that client specifically. And after you do that, go through each one and figure out which one is an authenticated attack versus unauthenticated attack. I would always start with the unauthenticated attacks first. That's just my methodology. I always start with them, and I always end up finding something having to do with the login page, the register page, the contact form, or the forgot password form. So be sure to check those out. I know host header injection is kind of a big thing right now. A lot of people are finding host header injection in forgot password form. So something to also take a look at. But definitely use an Excel sheet, use Obsidian, and make sure to take thorough notes when you do it.
Yeah, totally. So there you go, Edwin. Just have a mega mind, dude. Use your brain. Don't take
Yeah,
notes.
just take the noggin. Yeah, I mean, I think it takes years of experience, right? So I've been doing this for about 4
Sure.
years now.
Yeah.
So it's kind of rinse and repeat in the sense of methodology and what I look for,
Yeah,
on
totally.
each test. But if you're getting into it, I strongly encourage you to write everything you do down, especially when
Yeah.
you can't find something on an endpoint. You jot it down. If you have enough time at the end, go back to that endpoint and see if you can find something.
Yeah, 100%. I do something like that, like for bug bounty, basically. Like I haven't had to do a traditional pen test where I'm trying to bust everything, but where you're doing bug bounty and doing recon, it's really easy to get lost in the sauce on an endpoint and then hit a brick wall and have to start back at square one. So I always encourage people like make a fat list of interesting endpoints and why you think you're interesting, so that when you hit those walls, you have something to keep doing. And I think note
Totally.
taking in a pen testing scenario, winds up being valuable for similar reasons. There was another question here that I thought was interesting. We got about 5 more minutes here.
Sure.
What maybe you can provide some insight, Evan. How do you, or maybe how do you see people convince businesses that the cost of a pen test is worth the money?
You show them your value. And this is something that is honestly very difficult. And I'm trying to bridge the gap with AppSec on this. Is we're trying to help by giving out free education. We're trying to
Mhm.
showcase our skill set to the audience, which is our clientele. And I think the biggest thing that you can do is show your credibility, right? Give them an example report about what they're going to get. Not every application is going to have these critical, SQL injections or these crazy chained attacks. But if you showcase some of the vulnerabilities that are true, obviously blur out everything and make sure that everything is sanitized so you're not giving out client data to other clients. But if you can showcase your value and if you can showcase why you are the right person to do the pen test, they're more inclined to work with you. That's why I love CV hunting, right? Because with CV
Yeah,
hunting, it gives you credibility, right? Companies
yeah,
will look at your resume and they'll say, "Wow, you have 23 CVEs. That's incredible. How did you find them?" And then you start to go through your methodology, and they're like, "You know what? You may be a really good candidate for us." And then they end up hiring you. I would like to create a presentation slowly but surely around CV hunting. Maybe I'll do something with AppSec U about CV hunting and how to really build out your resume surrounding API security through false applications, which would be super cool.
yeah,
But I
man.
would definitely say just show your credibility.
Yeah, I echo that too. You know, if you guys saw the talk I gave earlier, like a big part of how I got my door opened was just showing that I knew what I was talking about, just answering questions in Discord, right? Like complicated technical questions, helping people troubleshooting, getting software working, and things like that. They didn't really care to check my qualifications too much because they could see me actively doing the work that they would need me doing in Discord. Um,
Totally.
yeah, it's kind of a similar principle, man. Just like get out there and prove that you can do it. And if you do that publicly, people notice, and it makes them want to work with you because it's transparent and people love transparency. Um, One last question here. Do you think looking for API vulnerabilities such as BOLA can be looked into on platforms where you don't have authentication, where there's no login? Um, I have an answer for this, but what do you think of it?
Yeah. I would say yes. There's definitely a way you could do it. So if you're on a spa application, you can start looking at some JavaScript and see what endpoints there are within the JavaScript. Most of the time, JavaScript gives a ton of hidden endpoints that not a lot of people see. I know that there was an Uber attack just recently on their Starlink platform where someone found a JavaScript endpoint and that led to taking over a user account, an employee account for that matter, and
Hmm.
them gaining access to all the user information on Subaru. So it's definitely possible. And again, this guy did everything completely unauthenticated.
Yeah,
So that's one way to do it. The other way is to use GoBuster, which I don't really recommend because WAFs at this rate just block everything that you do
yeah,
with
they just shut
GoBuster.
it down. Yeah,
Yeah. So I would say try to stick to JavaScript enumeration. Try to find JavaScript files, look through everything, see if there's hidden endpoints. If there are, try to craft it within curl and then have it be sent to your proxy like Burp Suite just to see the request in action. And if you get an unauthorized, that means that they have proper validation and authorization in place. But if they don't, you may be able to do additional things with it.
yeah. Curl testing is very powerful, man. It gets overlooked, and I can tell you, I use curl all the time in my day to day work as an engineer. Um, super valuable for things like that. Totally. Um, yeah, and the only caveat I basically have the same exact thing to say as Evan. The only caveat I would add is just because there aren't roles at the surface level doesn't mean they're not going on behind the scenes. So look
Right.
for evidence that roles do exist, maybe on the internal level, and you might find BOLA there. Being unauthenticated and having access to an authenticated user's resources, that's BOLA. That still counts.
Totally.
Um,
And it's probably one of the most, known, right? Well
yeah,
known vulnerabilities within API security. So people are definitely looking for that. That's for sure.
absolutely. Well, thanks a bunch, Evan. You are wrapping up track two for us today here at AppSecCon, and what an awesome way to shut it down. You guys remember to connect with Evan, jump in Discord, and talk with both of us in there.